It started with silence. No screams, no broken windows, just a teenager walking into his home and stepping into something no one should ever see. 3 family members, all found dead. No signs of a break-in. So who did it? And how long had he been waiting inside? It was early afternoon on Halloween when Javen Freeman stepped through the front door of his family home in Whitmore, Georgia, unaware that within minutes everything he understood about safety and normalcy would shatter. The house, usually humming with weekend noise, was strangely quiet. Too quiet. No laughter, no distant conversations, just a pressing stillness that seemed to thicken the air. He called out. No answer. It was unusual, but not alarming. Not yet. There were cars in the driveway, signs that someone should be home. Maybe everyone was napping. Maybe the TV was off for once. He walked past the living room, up the stairs, and headed straight to his bedroom. The hallway was dim. The floor didn't creak the way it normally did. He closed his door behind him and sat down to play video games, convincing himself it was nothing. But time passed, and something gnawed at him. This wasn't right. Shiraisi Freeman never stayed in bed this late. Someone always greeted him. He should have heard something by now. Anything. He left his room. The door to the master bedroom was slightly cracked. As he approached, a strange unease crept in. He peeked inside and saw 2 forms under the comforter, both perfectly still. The blanket pulled high, faces covered. He stepped closer, expecting movement, a sigh, a turn, a lazy Sunday groan. Nothing. He spoke. No reply. His eyes caught a foot sticking out from the edge of the bed. He reached down and tapped a leg. Still no movement, no reaction. That's when he pulled back the blanket, and everything changed. There was blood, soaking the pillow, draining down the side of the mattress, too much for any explanation his mind could offer. His hand shook as he reached across to the second figure. Another motionless face, another bloodied pillow. His brain fought to reason with the image. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was a Halloween setup. That thought lasted seconds until reality caught up. He stumbled back, bolted from the room, down the stairs, out the door. On the lawn, he called a relative. He couldn't form full sentences, just broken phrases, panic in his voice. Something was wrong. Very wrong. By the time help arrived, Javen was still outside, pacing, crying, and asking the same question no one could yet answer. What happened in there? The first deputy pulled up minutes after the 911 call came in. From the outside, the Freeman home in Whitmore, Georgia, looked undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no frantic crowds. Just a teenager, Javen Freeman, standing alone in the yard, pale and trembling, unable to go back inside. What the deputy found beyond that front door would rattle even the most experienced officers. The master bedroom was dimly lit, curtains drawn. But the sight was unmistakable. 2 bodies lay side by side beneath the comforter, their faces soaked in blood. There was no struggle evident in the room. The positions were calm. Too calm. As if sleep had been interrupted by sudden, irreversible violence. He called for backup immediately. Within the hour, investigators, crime scene techs, and detectives flooded the scene. They cleared each room, methodical and silent, until someone called out from upstairs. Another door. This one locked from the inside. They forced it open. A third body was discovered, this time on a twin bed, curled away from the door, facing the wall. No gunshots, no blood splatter on the ceiling, just a pool beneath the head, thick and dried, and a claw hammer left at the foot of the bed. The body showed signs of blunt force trauma. Repeated, precise blows. No chance to scream. 3 victims, all inside the same home. None had left a single cry for help. Back downstairs, investigators began piecing the puzzle. The man in the master bed, Gregory Freeman, had been shot multiple times in the face and head. 5 rounds in total. Close range. The positioning of the blanket, pulled up to his neck, suggested he was killed while still asleep. Beside him, his wife, Shirisi Freeman, had also been shot, 3 times, also to the head. But unlike him, her body had shifted. A wound on her hand suggested she had woken up, fought back, tried to survive. The room bore the evidence. Blood spatter on the walls, the headboard, even the lampshade. No shell casings, no signs of a break-in, no stolen property. Whoever did this had taken time. They came in with a plan, and they left without panic. Detectives huddled outside the home, reviewing what they knew. No forced entry, no robbery, and no screams reported by neighbors. But one detail stood out immediately. 2 people lived in the house and were unaccounted for. One had just made the 911 call. The other? No one had seen Tyrek Freeman since the night before. It wasn't clear yet why this family had been targeted. But by the time the sun began to set, officers already had one troubling conclusion. This was no random attack. Someone knew this house, and someone knew who would be sleeping where. But something else was missing. The Freeman family's white pickup truck. Javen Freeman, the teenager who discovered the bodies, mentioned seeing someone earlier that morning. A familiar figure in the driveway, loading items into the truck. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now, it was the lead investigators couldn't ignore. The bolo went out fast, all surrounding counties. A white truck, possibly headed east. Back at the station, the deeper digging began. The household was blended, 2 adults and children from previous relationships. While most members got along, one stood out. An adult son, Tyrek Freeman, who had long been the source of conflict. He didn't live in the home full-time, but was in and out. The previous night, he'd been there. He had a record. Not for theft or drugs, but for violence. Several years earlier, there had been an incident involving a physical altercation with one of the victims. Another time, he'd stolen a car. Once, he'd reportedly struck a parent during an argument and threatened suicide when police intervened. Mental health had been a recurring theme in his life. Diagnosed with severe disorders in his teens, he had been in and out of treatment centers. When medicated, he was described as calm. When not, explosive. Despite the warnings, the family had tried to keep the door open for him. But that door had also come with fear. Some relatives admitted they'd urged Gregory Freeman to draw a hard line, to stop letting his son come around. But loyalty, and maybe guilt, kept the boundaries soft. That weekend, he was invited back, fresh off a hunting trip with his father, who taught him how to shoot a gun. No one could have guessed it would be the last night the household would ever spend together. Detectives began forming a timeline. If Javen had left for church in the morning, and neighbors reported hearing what sounded like gunshots shortly after sunrise, the window for the crime was tight. Too tight for someone to break in and get out unnoticed, but just wide enough for someone who never had to break in at all. The missing truck, the history of violence, the long trail of mental instability. The pieces were beginning to align, and the focus of the case was narrowing to one name. Now, they just had to find Tyrek Freeman. Just hours after the crime scene was secured, a report came in from a deputy stationed nearly 170 miles away. A white pickup truck, matching the one flagged in the bulletin, had been spotted outside a rural cabin tucked deep off a back road. It was parked neatly. No visible damage, no rush. The cabin belonged to the Freeman family. It was the same place the adult son had stayed with his father, Gregory Freeman, just days before. A hunting trip meant to bond, a temporary escape from the usual tension. Now, it was a destination in a manhunt. Deputies surrounded the area quietly. No movement inside, no noise. Then, the front door opened, and there he was, Tyrek Freeman, leaning casually on the porch post, cigarette in hand, like nothing was wrong. No surprise, no panic, just a blank, unreadable calm. He didn't run. He didn't resist. As officers moved in, another team searched the vehicle. That's when the final pieces started falling into place. Inside the truck, they found a .22 caliber handgun. Nearby, traces of blood. Ballistics would later confirm the weapon matched the one used to kill the two adults. The wounds, the distance, the caliber. Everything aligned. The suspect was detained on the spot. Investigators began retracing his steps. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed him hours earlier, buying a sandwich and calmly walking out. No disguise, no urgency. Back at the cabin, no other weapons were found. No drugs, no alcohol. Just him, waiting. Meanwhile, family members began confirming what investigators feared. The tension between Tyrek and the victims hadn't just existed. It had worsened. Arguments had turned physical. At least one incident had ended with the suspect being kicked out of the home. Yet despite everything, the door was still open to him. He came and went, slept on the couch, ate dinner at the table. He had been part of the family, just not trusted by all of it. That weekend, the family had let him stay again. Maybe they thought it was just one more chance. Maybe they believed things were calming down. But by the time the sun came up the next morning, 3 people were dead. And the only one unaccounted for was now found. Calm, quiet, and seated in the very place his father had once taken him to get away from it all. At first, he said nothing. Just sat there in the interrogation room, eyes fixed on the floor, elbows resting on the table, no emotion. Detectives watched, waiting for a crack. It didn't take long. He asked for water, then asked what they'd found at the house. When they mentioned the gun in the truck, the blood, and the shell casings missing from the scene, he looked up for the first time. A quiet pause. Then a sentence that changed everything. "I didn't mean for it to be like that." What followed wasn't a detailed timeline, but fragments of frustration. Years of it. Tyrek Freeman spoke of resentment, of feeling unwanted in the house. Said he was treated like a visitor while they played family without him. That no matter how many times he came back, it was like he never belonged. He described his stepmother, Charisse Freeman, as controlling. Said she ruined everything between him and his father. Brought up old arguments. Fights that got physical. Times he was kicked out. Times she told him not to come back. He also confessed to sexually assaulting her after the murder. But deeper than the resentment was something else. Dependence. He had no stable job. No income. He relied on his father, Gregory Freeman, for money, shelter, everything. And in the days leading up to the killings, something had shifted. A conversation about setting boundaries, about cutting him off financially unless he changed. That conversation stayed with him. He said he snapped, that he didn't plan to kill all of them, that it started with one, and the rest, he claimed, happened in a blur. But investigators weren't convinced. Not when he admitted knowing where the gun was kept. Not when he remembered wiping down surfaces. Not when he removed the shell casings and took the time to drive nearly 3 hours away. This wasn't a blur. It was execution. The blunt force used on his older sibling, Andre Freeman, investigators believed, was to prevent any sound from waking the rest of the house. The gunshots came later, controlled, precise. In the end, he didn't offer an apology. Not really. Just repeated that everything had gotten too far. They asked if he remembered what he saw when he pulled the trigger. He paused, then said, "I saw everything I wasn't part of." The case never made it to a full trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the murder weapon, the blood in the truck, the timeline, the confession, the defense shifted strategy. Instead of fighting for innocence, they negotiated to avoid the death penalty. Months after the arrest, Tyrek Freeman changed his plea to guilty on 3 counts of murder. No contest, no theatrics. Just a quiet admission in a courtroom filled with shattered family members. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 consecutive life terms. He didn't look back as he was led out. For the relatives left behind, the sentence wasn't closure, just confirmation. The teenager who had found the bodies, Javen Freeman, never returned to the home. He moved in with extended family and, for a long time, refused to speak publicly. He was just 16 and had walked into something no one should ever see. The house sat empty for months before being quietly sold. Neighbors say the new owners never asked questions. For those who knew the victims, there were no simple explanations. Some blamed the system, saying the warnings were there all along. The violent outbursts, the psychiatric admissions, the escalating tension that never got resolved. Others blamed misplaced loyalty. That despite all the red flags, the family kept opening the door, kept hoping he would change. In hindsight, some believed it wasn't just a family murder. It was the final, inevitable collision between untreated mental illness and decades of unresolved family trauma. Everyone agreed on one thing. This didn't have to happen. But no one stopped it in time. He was only in his mid-20s when he entered prison. 3 life sentences. No chance of parole. No path forward. From the moment he arrived, staff flagged him as high risk. Not just because of what he'd done, but because of who he was. Emotionally unstable, deeply withdrawn, and volatile. His mental health continued to spiral. He refused medication at times, isolated himself, got into conflicts with guards and other inmates. On several occasions, he was placed in observation, then returned to general population. The facility had seen worse, but few crimes as personal as his. Some said he carried guilt. Others said he barely processed what he'd done. He never granted interviews, never spoke publicly again. But in fragments of conversations overheard by staff, one theme kept surfacing, that he felt erased by his own family long before that night. That in his mind, the killings weren't about rage alone, but something deeper. A collapse. A breakdown that no one caught in time. Less than 5 years into his sentence, Tyrek Freeman was found dead in his cell. The cause? Self-inflicted injury. There was no note, no farewell, just a body and silence. His death closed the case for good, but not the pain. Those left behind were forced to wrestle with questions that would never be fully answered. How had things unraveled so badly? How many warning signs were missed? And why didn't anyone act sooner? Javen Freeman, now older, has never spoken publicly about what he saw that day. Those who knew the family say he's moved far from Whitmore, trying to build a life of his own, one untouched by headlines and haunted memories. In the end, the tragedy wasn't just the lives taken, it was how many chances there were to prevent it, and how every one of them was ignored. A family that tried, a system that failed, and a young man whose pain turned into something far more dangerous than anyone was willing to believe. A case closed, but never truly understood.